Hello everyone, Professor Cicerelli. We're going to be talking about run-ons and fragments today. Fragments and run-ons, and we'll do it in that order. So what I would, now that we've gone through, and if you've watched the other videos, I think what the videos that are going to be helpful for understanding fragments, run-ons, go back and watch the videos, and I'll link them up there. Go back and watch the videos on prepositions and conjunctions. That's going to help you. And then also, I think, nouns and pronouns and verbs. That'll help you too with sentence fragment stuff and with run-ons. So what is a sentence fragment? Sentence fragments, people have this misunderstanding that sentence fragments are short sentences. They also have the mistaken idea that run-ons are long sentences, and I want to disabuse you of those ideas because they're not correct. Sentence fragments tend to be short, but really what they are is a sentence that's missing something. So I won't even want to call it a sentence. But the way you make a sentence fragment, the way a sentence fragment happens, it's one of four ways. Okay, one of four ways. First way a sentence fragment happens is when you are missing a subject. Okay, if you're missing a subject, you will end up with a sentence fragment. Have a look on screen there. The catcher batted fifth. That's a complete sentence. But then fouled out, ending the inning. Okay, what do I have here? What I have here is simply a verb phrase. Okay, it's a verb phrase that's missing its subject. Okay, so it's a fragment. Okay. So it's got a verb, but it's missing its subject. Okay. The other way you make a sentence fragment is if you're missing a verb. Okay, you have a subject, but you're missing your verb. The first two batters walked, complete thought, subject, verb. Next piece there, Manny Ramirez again. It's missing a verb. I have my subject, Manny Ramirez, but he's not doing anything, right? What did he do again? What did Ramirez do again? It's missing its verb. And we'll talk in a second about how once you've identified that it's a fragment, how do you fix it? We'll talk about that in a second. Another way you make a sentence fragment is if you have a dependent clause by itself. Now, the book here says subordinating word. I'll clarify that a little bit and say that when you have a dependent clause sitting by itself without its independent part attached to it, remember, go back and watch that video where I explain this. When you have that dependent clause just sitting by itself without being attached to an independent clause, you have a fragment. Okay, so have a look at this dependent clause here. Although the Yankees loaded the bases. Okay, I've got a subject, Yankees. I've got a verb, loaded. Bases is my object. But this clause, the Yankees loaded the bases, begins with although. And in that video on prepositions and conjunctions, I explained that dependent clauses always begin with a subordinating conjunction. And that's what although is. Although is a subordinating conjunction. Okay? So all I have here is a dependent clause with nothing after it. Okay? So I've got a fragment. Okay? And it would be exactly the same problem if this were because the Yankees loaded the bases. I'd have the exact same problem, that I've got a dependent clause but no independent clause. Okay? Remember, your book tells you a sentence needs at least one independent clause. with a subject and a verb. Okay. Here we've got a subject and a verb, but it's introduced with this subordinating conjunction, which tells us dependent clause. So missing subject, you've got a fragment. Missing verb, you have a fragment. I would also add to this, if you're missing both subject and a verb, and you have like just a prepositional phrase or something, then you've absolutely got a fragment. And then lastly, if you have a dependent clause by itself without its independent part, you've got a fragment. Now, I just told you how sentence fragments happen. I told you that because you want to avoid them, right? I had a student years ago who was like, Professor C, why are you teaching us how to make sentence fragments? Well, I'm teaching you how to make them so that you don't make them. I'm teaching you how they happen so that you can avoid making those mistakes, right? So here's how they happen, and then we want to avoid it. And so your book just gives you some reminders of what some subordinating conjunctions are. Here's a list. Okay. This is not all of them, but this is some of them. Okay. Now, how do you fix them? Well, if you've got fragments, you first have to be able to identify them as such. Once you identify that they are fragments, you need to identify what kind of fragment are they. Is it the kind of fragment that's missing a subject, the kind of fragment missing a verb, or is it the kind of fragment that is a dependent clause? And then you add what's missing. Or there's another fix, which we'll talk about when we get down here. So look how your book did this. And it's taking exactly these sentences from up here. Okay. So the catcher batted fifth. He fouled out, ending the inning. Okay, so notice what's added here. It's the subject's added, he. And so he fouled out. So what is he? Grammatically speaking, what is he? Leave it in the comments down below. What is he? What kind of pronoun is he? Let me know down below. Okay, but you'll notice the subject was added here, right? Subject was added. Okay, with a verb, missing verb. That's what we add. The first two batters walked. Manny Ramirez walked again. So notice this verb is added again because that's what was missing. We just had a subject here. We had that subject phrase, but it was missing the verb, and so that's what we added. And we added it to make it an independent clause. Okay? Oh, let's look at this. This is a good one. This is a good one. This is another example of adding what's missing. I like this. Sometimes a fragment contains a verb form. Now, we talked about this when we talked about that in that video where we talked about subjects and verbs. I said there are certain kinds of verbs that where they partner with helping verbs. Certain verb tenses partner with helping verbs. For example, the perfect tenses, present perfect, past perfect, they partner with helping verbs. Your progressive tenses, is going, was walking, those INGs, they partner with helping verbs as well. And so what your book is telling you here is sometimes those helping verbs are missing or left out. Okay. And we can fix that. And if those helping verbs are missing, those helping verbs are essential because they're partnering with the main verb. And if those helping verbs are left out, you end up with a fragment. Okay. You end up with, more specifically, if you want to know more specifically, you end up with a sentence that has what's called a verbal, which is something that looks like a verb but is not a verb. You have that. And it's missing the helping verb, which makes it incomplete. Yeah, so let's look at this. As the game went on, what is that? Is that a dependent clause or an independent clause? Let me know down below. As the game went on, the fans started to lose interest. The pitcher's arm weakening. I'm reading the original. The pitcher's arm weakening and the fielders making a number of errors. Okay, what do we have here? What we have here in the original, not in the fixed version, we have here with weakening. It's not letting me highlight. What we have there with weakening and with making is a present participle, okay, which is, like I said, is an example of a verbal. It's not a verb on its own. Weakening on its own is not a verb. Making on its own is not a verb. Okay, it's a participle, and in that video I explained participles need to partner with helping verbs. Okay, so the way that I fix this is either the pitcher's arm, add the helping verb, was weakening and the fielders were making a number of errors. I could do that. I could add the helping verb. Or what the sentence here is, what the book here is telling you, is you could also just take that verb, the participle form there, and just make it the verb in the past tense. The pitcher's arm weakened and the fielders made a number of errors. Okay, fix it that way. Okay. You'll see that the second sentence here, adds that helping verb. Political commercials appearing on television, we know that's a fragment because appearing by itself is not a verb. And so what did the correction do? It added that helping verb to be. Now you got a complete sentence. Okay, so we talked about adding a subject. We talked about adding a verb if it's missing. Let's talk about how do you fix a sentence fragment if it's just a dependent clause on its own. Well, let's look. I am thinking about moving to a large city because I dislike the lack of privacy in my country town of 3,000 residents. Because I dislike the lack of privacy in my country town of 3,000 residents. So have a look at this. This is where that made-up rule that I told you about, never start a sentence with because, this is where that made-up rule came from. Because your teachers, if they ever told you that, were worried that all you would do is have a dependent clause like this without an independent clause. You'll notice it's missing an independent clause. Because I dislike the private, so I've got because, which is my subordinating conjunction, right? I is my subject, dislike is my verb. The lack of privacy in my country town of this whole thing, all the way from here till the end, is a big object. Okay, it's an object that's made up of a couple prepositional phrases, you'll notice. Okay, same here. Prepositional phrase, prepositional phrase, prepositional phrase. Okay, but it's still just a dependent clause by itself. How do we fix that? There are actually two ways to fix it. Your book only shows you one. So the way you could fix this is chop out because, okay? And then you could chop out because and make this a whole separate sentence. Because now if you get rid of that, if you get rid of because, you get rid of that subordinating conjunction, now you have subject, verb, object, you've got a complete sentence. You've got an independent clause. Okay? So I'm thinking about moving to a large city, period. I dislike the lack of privacy in my country town of 3,000 residents. Perfect. What you can also do is keep the because. Keep it there, but get rid of the period that separates these two. What have you done now? Now what you've done is you've made this first part your independent clause, and the second part still exists as your dependent clause. Okay? So, but you got to be able to identify this is a dependent clause on its own. It can't exist by itself, so I need to do something. I need to get rid of this. Whoops. Get rid of that subordinating conjunction. Now I've got two independent sentences. Or keep the because, make this one sentence where this is my independent clause and this is my dependent clause. and then you'll obviously lowercase the because it's one sentence. Okay. All right. Let's do. I want to try some exercises with you. Let's do a few exercises. Okay. So we're looking at some sentences. We're trying to decide whether they are fragments or not. Let's do a few. Okay. Question 1. Here's the sentence. Just a note to say hi to my favorite niece. Okay, what do we think? Fragment or not a fragment? Leave it in the comment below, but I'm about to tell you. See if you get it right. Okay, does it contain a fragment? Yes, it contains a fragment. Correct. Why, before we move on though, why does it contain a fragment? Okay, why? Well, what is here? What's here? Just a note to say hi to my favorite niece. Actually, in that little bit there, you're missing both a subject and a verb. Just a note to say hi to my niece. I guess you could write a sentence where that would be the subject, but chances are the sentence you're going to write around that is, this is just a note to say hi to my favorite niece, or I gave her a note to say hi to my favorite niece, whatever. But on the surface, this is missing both subject and verb. At the very least, it's missing a verb. There is no verb here. Okay. A note to say hi to my favorite niece. All this information to say hi to my favorite niece. This is all, think of it like adjective information that is describing the note. Okay. So there is no verb here. Okay. You might say to say, that's a verb. In this case, it's describing the note. Okay. Let's go to the next one. Ooh, good one. Have a look at this one. We're trying to decide whether there's a fragment here. Because my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State. Contain a fragment? Comment down below, let me know. And when you comment down below, let me know what kind of fragment it is too. Not just is it a fragment, what kind of fragment? It is a fragment. Okay. Why is it a fragment? What kind of fragment is it? Let's look at it. Because my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State. Okay. How does it begin? It begins with because, which we know is a subordinating conjunction, okay, which tells us this is the dependent clause by itself fragment. Okay. How can I fix this? Well, two ways. I can add an independent clause to this. Because my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State, she is hiring a moving company. Okay. Or I could fix this as as we just looked at. I could fix this by just simply chopping out the subordinating conjunction because. Then it becomes my niece is planning to attend college at Ohio State. Okay. I'll show you one more, and I won't let you know the fix, but I'll have you post down below. Okay, so have a look at this one. As a travel destination, Asia attracts many Americans now. Let me know down below, and I'll pin my comment to let you know what it is. But leave a comment whether you think this is a fragment or not. But this was our video on fragments. If you have any other questions, let me know. Send me an email. Leave me a comment.